The scent of pine and autumn chill hung in the night air. As Eleanor Grace jolted awake, her heart pounding against her ribs. Something had pulled her from sleep, a presence that lingered at the edges of her awareness. The cabin creaked around her, familiar, yet suddenly alien in the darkness. Moonlight spilled through thin curtains, casting silver patterns across her bedroom floor. She sat up, clutching the quilt to her chest, listening. There it was again, a whisper of movement outside her window, too deliberate to be the wind. Eleanor slipped from bed, her joints protesting as she moved across the cold wooden floor. At 65, she had grown accustomed to the complaints of her aging body, but tonight adrenaline dulled the aches. The window offered a view of her yard and the dense Montana forest beyond. Nothing moved in the moonlight. Then a shadow shifted, darker than the night around it, flowing like smoke between the ancient pines. Not an animal, not a person. Something else entirely. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to the silver pendant hanging around her neck, a wolf with sapphire eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her grandmother's final gift pressed into her palm 50 years ago, with words that had shaped her life since "remember who you are, even when others forget." The shadow paused at the edge of the trees as though sensing her gaze. For one heart-stopping moment, it seemed to look directly at her, though it had no eyes she could discern. Then it flowed away, heading north toward the Silver Ridge territory. "The children," Eleanor whispered, certainty blooming like ice in her chest. She dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a thick sweater, comfortable hiking boots worn from years traversing these woods. The silver pendant she tucked beneath her clothes, its familiar weight a comfort against her skin. From beneath her bed, she retrieved an old leather satchel filled with herbs and remedies passed down through generations. Tonight she would need every bit of knowledge her grandmother had shared. 10 years had passed since Eleanor had moved to this remote cabin after retiring from 40 years as an emergency room nurse. 10 years of solitude, of healing herbs and quiet contemplation. 10 years of watching from the periphery as the Silver Ridge Pack conducted their business in the valley below, never quite accepting her presence but tolerating it out of some ancient respect for her grandmother. The pack didn't know she watched them, didn't know she had learned their patterns and rituals, didn't know she had grown fond of the triplets, the alpha's children, who sometimes wandered near her garden under the watchful eyes of their caretakers. Those children were in danger now. Eleanor felt it with the same certainty she had felt when a patient was about to crash during her nursing days. Some instincts transcended rationality. The forest welcomed her as she stepped from her porch, ancient trees standing sentinel in the moonlight. Eleanor moved with purpose, following paths only her feet remembered. Her breath fogged in the autumn air as she descended toward the valley where the Silver Ridge Pack made their home. Sarah had been the first pack member to speak to Eleanor, a young woman with kind eyes, who occasionally brought supplies when winter storms made the mountain roads impassable. It was Sarah who had tentatively invited Eleanor to the summer solstice celebration 3 months ago, an invitation Eleanor had politely declined. The weight of so many eyes, so many judgments had seemed unbearable then. Tonight, fear for the children overcame such hesitations. The main house came into view, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that housed the core family of the pack. Lights still burned in several windows despite the late hour. Something was amiss. Eleanor paused at the tree line, observing. Warriors patrolled the perimeter, their movements tense and alert. Through an open window, she caught fragments of urgent conversation. "Perimeter breach, eastern border. Alpha wants everyone on alert." A diversion? The realization struck Eleanor with sudden clarity. Whatever threatened the children wasn't coming from the east. She circled west, keeping to the shadows, grateful for the dark clothing that helped her blend into the night. The children's wing was on this side of the house, separated slightly from the main structure, with large windows overlooking a garden. Security focused elsewhere, these windows now stood vulnerable. A flicker of movement caught her eye. The same shadow she had seen earlier, flowing like smoke across the garden toward the children's windows. Up close, it seemed more substantial, a darkness that absorbed the moonlight around it. As it approached the window, long fingers like twisted branches extended from the mass, reaching for the glass. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The creature emanated ancient malevolence, something far beyond the natural world she knew. Yet fear couldn't paralyze her, not when innocent lives hung in the balance. Decades of emergency medicine had taught her to act despite terror, to function when others froze. She reached into her satchel fingers, finding the small pouch her grandmother had prepared long ago. Against those who hunt in darkness, the old woman had said, never explaining further. Inside, dried wolfsbane flowers mixed with rowan berries, salt, and silver shavings bound together with strands of white horsehair. Eleanor moved silently across the garden, keeping to the shadows. The creature had pried the window open slightly, its unnaturally long fingers slipping through the gap. From inside came the soft sounds of children sleeping, unaware of the horror reaching for them. With practiced movements, Eleanor prepared the protection ritual. A small silver knife, another of her grandmother's relics, sliced across her palm. She allowed 3 drops of blood to fall onto the herb mixture, whispering words taught to her decades ago, their meaning lost to time but their power undimmed. Blood of my blood, light in darkness, shield against shadow. The mixture began to glow with soft blue light, illuminating her weathered hands. Without hesitation, Eleanor tossed the pouch through the narrow window opening. A high, thin scream like winter wind through dead branches pierced the night. The shadow creature recoiled from the window, its form twisting in agony as blue light spread like water, forming a barrier around the children's room. Eleanor pressed herself flat against the wall as the thing dropped to the ground, its body contorting unnaturally. Up close, she could see it was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every way. Limbs too long, skin like bark eyes, like empty holes in a withered face. It turned those hollow eyes toward her, and Eleanor felt her soul grow cold. Human, it hissed the word, formed by a mouth that seemed to crack open in its face. Little light carrier, you should not interfere in matters beyond your understanding. Eleanor's body trembled, but she forced herself to stand straight, the silver pendant burning against her skin, giving her courage. 40 years of facing down death in emergency rooms had taught her to master her fear. I understand enough, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. You won't touch those children. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The Alpha King's precious pups. Do you think he will thank you, human? Do you think he even sees you? The truth in those words stung, but Eleanor pushed the pain aside, scoffing, I don't do it for thanks. Then why? It asked, tilting its head at an impossible angle. Because they're innocent, she answered simply. And because I can. The creature moved towards her, its body flowing like smoke. Then you will die in their place. A fair exchange. Eleanor backed away, knowing she couldn't outrun it, couldn't fight it. The protection spell would hold for the children, but she had nothing left to shield herself. She gripped her grandmother's pendant, praying for a miracle. The night air suddenly grew heavy, charged with power that made her hair stand on end. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the darkness, primordial and terrifying in its rage. From the shadows emerged a massive black wolf, larger than any natural animal could be. Its eyes glowed amber in the darkness, fixed on the shadow creature with murderous intent. Behind it, more wolves appeared, teeth bared in silent snarls. The shadow creature froze, then began to retreat, its form becoming less substantial. You dare! The voice that filled the night was human, yet layered it with something ancient and powerful. It seemed to come from the black wolf, though its mouth did not move. You dare enter my territory, threaten my children. The bargain was made, the creature hissed. A life for a life. If not the pups, then another must pay the price. The massive wolf stalked forward. There was no bargain, only a lie told by one who will pay with her own blood. Eleanor's mind reeled. Someone had made a deal with this creature. Someone had offered the Alpha's children as payment. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. The creature seemed to shrink before the Alpha's advance, but its hollow eyes fixed on Eleanor one last time. Ask your fallen Luna what price she was willing to pay for immortal beauty, it said. Ask what blood she promised when her own life failed her. With a sound like tearing silk, it dissolved into the shadows, leaving only the scent of decay behind. Eleanor stood, frozen blood still dripping from her palm, as the black wolf shifted, bones cracking, fur receding. In moments, a man stood where the wolf had been, naked and magnificent in the moonlight. He radiated such power and fury that Eleanor couldn't look directly at him. One of his warriors hurried forward with a robe, which he donned without taking his eyes off her. What did you do? He demanded, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. Eleanor found her voice after a moment. Protection spell. For the children. Show me. With shaking hands, Eleanor led him to the window. The blue light still shimmered around the room, and through the glass they could see 3 small forms sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of the danger that had stalked them. The alpha, pressed his palm against the barrier, and Eleanor felt a jolt of energy pass between them, as though the spell recognized him. The blue light pulsed once, then allowed his hand to pass through. "Blood magic," he said, turning those golden eyes back to her. "Old magic, human magic, yet not entirely human." Eleanor met his gaze momentarily, forgetting her fear in the face of his scrutiny. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 45, with midnight black hair streaked with silver at the temples. His face bore the lines of someone who carried heavy responsibilities. But there was something else there too, a vulnerability beneath the strength. "You risked your life for my children," he said, his voice softening slightly. It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Anyone would have?" "No." His voice was like gravel, deep and rough with emotion she couldn't identify. "Anyone would not have. My own Luna." He broke off, pain flashing across his face before the mask of authority returned. Slowly he reached out, taking her injured hand and turning it palm up to examine the cut she'd made for the protection spell. The touch of his skin against hers sent a shock of electricity up her arm, making her gasp. The alpha froze, his eyes widening as they locked with hers. Something passed between them, something ancient and undeniable that made the world around them fade to insignificance. "Impossible," he whispered. But there was wonder in his voice, not denial. Before Eleanor could ask what he meant, shouts erupted from the direction of the main house. Warriors were returning from patrol, their expressions grim. "Alpha Blackwood," one called. "We found signs of intrusion all along the eastern perimeter, deliberate, a distraction." Garrett Blackwood, the alpha of Silver Ridge Pack, released Eleanor's hand reluctantly. "The threat came here instead," he said, gesturing toward the children's window. "This woman protected my children from an ancient evil while we chased shadows." The warriors looked at Eleanor with new eyes, assessment replacing the dismissal she was accustomed to receiving from pack members. "Secure the perimeter," Garrett ordered. "Double the guard tonight. I want every inch of our territory patrolled until dawn." As the warriors moved to obey, Garrett turned back to Eleanor. "You have my gratitude," he said formally. Then his voice dropping lower, "and my curiosity. Few humans possess knowledge of such protections, fewer still the power to invoke them." Eleanor glanced toward the still glowing window. "My grandmother taught me, for emergencies." "Your grandmother must have been extraordinary." A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. "She was." "The children will sleep safely now." "The protection will hold until morning," Eleanor confirmed. "It's anchored by my blood and intent." Garrett studied her face with an intensity that might have been uncomfortable if Eleanor hadn't spent decades being studied by desperate patients seeking reassurance. "You're Eleanor Grace," he said finally, "the woman who lives alone in the cabin at the edge of our territory." Surprise flickered across her features. "You know me." "I know of you. My packmate Sarah speaks highly of you, and my children mention the kind woman with silver hair who sometimes gives them honey candies when they wander too close to her garden." Heat touched Eleanor's cheeks. "They're good children, curious, bright. And now in your debt, as am I." Garrett glanced toward the house. "It's late. We have much to discuss, but it can wait until morning." "Will you stay? I have questions about what happened here tonight, about what that creature said." Eleanor hesitated. She had maintained her solitude for a decade, venturing into town only when necessary, interacting with the pack even less. To stay in their stronghold surrounded by wolves who viewed humans with suspicion at best, yet the children might still be in danger. And the shadow creature had spoken of a bargain, a promise of blood. She needed to understand what threat still hung over these innocents. "I'll stay," she said finally, "but I can sleep in a chair in the children's room." "To maintain the protection?" Something like respect flickered in Garrett's eyes. "As you wish, Sarah will bring you what you need." The next hour passed in a flurry of quiet activity. Sarah appeared, her kind face creased with worry that softened to gratitude when Garrett explained what Eleanor had done. She brought blankets, water, and a first aid kit for Eleanor's cut hand, fussing over her with genuine concern. The children slept through it all, their small faces peaceful in slumber. Jack, Lucas, and Emma, 6-year-old triplets who had lost their mother 2 years earlier in what the pack called an accident, though the shadow creature's words now cast doubt on that explanation. Eleanor settled into a comfortable rocking chair near the window, her satchel of remedies at her feet, the blue glow of her protection spell casting gentle light across the room. Garrett had left to organize the pack's defenses, but his presence lingered in her mind, as did the strange jolt of connection when he had touched her hand. Sarah paused at the door before leaving. "What you did tonight," she said softly, "protecting the children when you didn't have to, the pack won't forget it." Eleanor smiled tiredly. "I was simply in the right place at the right time." Sarah shook her head. "It was more than that. The Void Stalker is ancient and dangerous. Few would stand against it, fewer still survive the encounter." She hesitated, then added, "Alpha Blackwood has been alone since Catherine died. The children, too. They need someone who sees their worth beyond their status." Before Eleanor could respond to this cryptic statement, Sarah slipped from the room, leaving her alone with the sleeping children and her thoughts. Through the window, the moon hung full and heavy in the night sky, casting silver light across the forest. Eleanor found her gaze drawn repeatedly to it, a strange longing building in her chest that she couldn't name. Her pendant seemed warm against her skin, almost alive with energy. The quiet was broken by a small voice. "Miss Ellie." Eleanor turned to find Emma, the only girl among the triplets, sitting up in bed, her golden eyes so like her father's wide in the dim light. "I'm here, little one," Eleanor said softly, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "Did you have a bad dream?" Emma shook her head, her dark curls bouncing. "I felt the blue light. It's pretty. Did you make it?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to explain to a child so young. "Yes, I did. It's a special light to keep you safe while you sleep." The little girl reached out, touching Eleanor's pendant with small fingers. "Your necklace glows too, inside, like you." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine at the child's perception. "Does it now?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Grandpa Irving says some people have old magic in their blood. Do you have old magic, Miss Ellie?" "Perhaps I do," Eleanor said, smoothing the child's hair back from her forehead. "Now back to sleep, sweetheart. Morning will be here soon enough." Emma lay down obediently but kept her eyes on Eleanor. "Will you stay? Daddy gets sad at night. The bad dreams come for him, too." Eleanor's heart constricted at the simple observation. "I'll stay until morning," she promised. The child smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "Good. Maybe your blue light will keep Daddy's bad dreams away, too." Soon Emma's breathing deepened into sleep once more, joining her brothers in peaceful slumber. Eleanor returned to her chair, pondering the little girl's words. Children often saw truths adults missed, their perceptions unclouded by preconceptions. The night deepened around the house, the sounds of the pack's activities gradually quieting. Eleanor dozed lightly, decades of hospital night shifts having trained her to rest while remaining alert to any change in her patient's conditions. The blue glow of the protection spell pulsed gently, synchronized somehow with her own heartbeat. She woke fully when the door opened silently just before dawn. Garrett stood there, his powerful frame silhouetted against the hallway light. He had changed into simple clothes, jeans, and a dark Henley that did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. "They're still sleeping," Eleanor whispered, rising from her chair. Garrett nodded, moving into the room with surprising grace for a man his size. He stood looking down at his children, naked love and fierce protectiveness evident in his expression. "They're everything to me," he said quietly, the admission seeming to surprise him as much as Eleanor. "When Catherine died, they became my whole world." Eleanor remained silent, recognizing that this was not a man who shared his feelings easily. "The creature that came for them," he continued after a moment. "You called it a protection spell. You knew what it was." "Not precisely," Eleanor admitted, "but my grandmother taught me to recognize evil when it appears, to protect against it." "Your grandmother must have been remarkable." "She was." Eleanor touched her pendant unconsciously. "She prepared me for many things, though I'm only now beginning to understand some of her lessons." Garrett's gaze fixed on the pendant. That symbol, the wolf with sapphire eyes, it's an ancient sigil of the boundary keepers, those who walk between the human and wolf worlds. His eyes lifted to hers, intense and searching. "Who exactly was your grandmother, Eleanor Grace?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications Eleanor was only beginning to comprehend. Before she could answer, Lucas stirred in his bed, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Dad," he mumbled, then brightened, seeing Eleanor. "Miss Ellie, you came to visit." Soon all three children were awake, their excitement at finding Eleanor in their room dispelling the serious conversation. They climbed from their beds, surrounding her with questions and chatter that showed no trace of the danger they had so narrowly escaped. Garrett watched with a mixture of amusement and thoughtfulness as Eleanor answered their questions patiently, her manner with the children revealing a warmth and gentleness that contrasted with the courage she had shown facing the Void Stalker. "Miss Ellie saved you from bad dreams last night." He told them, a simplification that seemed to satisfy the children. "Can she stay for breakfast?" Jack asked eagerly. "Cook is making pancakes today." Garrett looked at Eleanor, one eyebrow raised in question. "The invitation stands if you are willing. We have much to discuss." Eleanor hesitated only briefly. The mystery of the shadow creature, the bargain it had mentioned, the strange connection she had felt with Garrett, and most importantly, the continued safety of these children who had somehow worked their way into her heart. All of these demanded answers. "I'd like that," she said simply. Garrett nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Children, go with Sarah to get ready for breakfast," he said as the young woman appeared in the doorway. "Miss Eleanor and I need to talk before joining you." The children protested, but eventually allowed themselves to be led away, extracting promises from Eleanor that she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. When they were gone, Garrett closed the door, his demeanor shifting from father to alpha. "Last night," he began without preamble, "when I touched your hand, you felt it too. Don't deny it." Eleanor's breath caught at the memory of that electric connection. "I felt something, yes." "What was it?" "A true bond," he said, watching her face carefully. "Rare even among wolves, nearly unheard of between wolf and human. A connection of souls that transcends ordinary relationships." Eleanor shook her head, disbelief warring with the certainty that had bloomed in her chest at his words. "That's impossible. I'm 65 years old, a retired nurse who lives alone in the woods. You're an alpha werewolf in his prime. What possible connection could we have?" "Age means nothing to the bond," Garrett said, moving closer. "And you are not merely human, Eleanor Grace. The magic you worked last night, the pendant you wear, the way the Void Stalker spoke to you, there is wolf blood in your veins, however diluted by time and generations." Eleanor's hand went to her pendant, memories stirring of things her grandmother had told her, peculiarities she had noticed throughout her life. Her uncanny ability to sense danger, her affinity for the wilderness, the way animals responded to her presence. "My grandmother," she said slowly, "never knew her parents. She was raised by an old woman at the edge of a wolf territory in Minnesota. She never spoke much about her past, but she taught me things. Knowledge that seemed to come from another time." Garrett nodded as if this confirmed something he had suspected. The Boundary Keepers were often foundlings with mixed blood raised in the borderlands between human and wolf territories. They carried ancient knowledge, preserved magic that predated the division between our kinds. He paused, then continued more gently. "The true bond between us doesn't demand anything, Eleanor. It simply exists, a recognition of complementary souls. What we choose to do with it is up to us." Eleanor studied him, this powerful man who led his pack with strength, yet spoke to her with respect, who clearly adored his children, who had lost his mate, and carried that grief visibly in the shadows behind his eyes. "What do you propose we do?" she asked finally. "First," he said, "I ask you to stay at least until we understand the threat that still hangs over my children." The Void Stalker spoke of a bargain made by Catherine, my late wife. "I need to know what deal she struck and with what consequences." And after that, something like hope flickered in his golden eyes. "After that, we see where the bond leads us. No expectations, no demands, just possibility." Eleanor thought of her quiet cabin, the solitude she had wrapped around herself like armor after retiring. It had been peaceful, but if she was honest with herself, it had also been lonely. Here was an opportunity for something she had never expected to find again at her age. Purpose. "I'll stay," she said, "for the children's sake, and to understand what's happening." Relief softened Garrett's features. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "There's an elder I want you to meet, Irving Steele. He's been with the pack for nearly 2 centuries and knows more about the old ways than anyone living. If anyone can help us understand the Void Stalker and this bond between us, it's him." Eleanor nodded, thinking of Emma's words the night before. "Grandpa Irving says some people have old magic in their blood." "I look forward to meeting him," she said. Garrett moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Last night you faced an ancient evil without hesitation to protect children you barely know. Whatever comes next, Eleanor Grace, know that you have earned my respect and the respect of my pack. You are not alone anymore. The words touched something deep in Eleanor's heart, a loneliness she had carried for so long, she had almost forgotten it was there. Not alone anymore. The prospect was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. As they left the room together, the blue glow of the protection spell finally faded, its purpose fulfilled. But the connection it had revealed, the ancient magic it had awakened, was only beginning to unfold. Eleanor felt it humming in her blood, in the pendant against her skin, in the strange bond that now linked her to this alpha and his children. Something her grandmother had told her long ago echoed in her mind. There will come a day when the moon calls to the wolf in your blood. When that day comes, do not be afraid. It is not an ending, but a beginning. The moon had called, and Eleanor had answered. Morning light streamed through tall windows as Eleanor followed Garrett into the main dining hall of the Silver Ridge house. Conversation faltered at their entrance, dozens of eyes turning to assess the human woman who walked alongside their alpha with such quiet confidence. Eleanor felt the weight of their stares, but kept her chin up, decades of commanding respect in chaotic emergency rooms having prepared her for scrutiny. The hall itself was impressive, a vast space with vaulted ceilings supported by massive timber beams. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by smaller tables where pack members gathered for the morning meal. The aroma of coffee, bacon, and pancakes filled the air, unexpectedly homey in such a grand setting. The triplets spotted them immediately, waving enthusiastically from their seats near the head of the main table. Jack had syrup already smeared across one cheek, while Emma appeared to be explaining something important to Lucas, her small hands gesturing emphatically. They looked so normal, so innocent, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to being taken in the night. "Miss Ellie," Emma called out, patting the empty seat beside her. "We saved you a place." Garrett's hand touched Eleanor's lower back, lightly guiding her forward. That simple contact sent another jolt of awareness through her, the strange bond between them humming like a plucked string. From the slight pause in his movement, she knew he had felt it too. The dining hall had gone quiet, all eyes tracking their progress toward the main table. Eleanor heard whispers, caught fragments of speculation about her presence, about what had happened in the night. News traveled quickly in a pack, it seemed. "Everyone," Garrett spoke as they reached the head of the table, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "This is Eleanor Grace. Last night she protected my children from an ancient threat while we were distracted elsewhere. She has agreed to stay with us while we investigate this danger. She will be accorded every respect." The formal introduction carried unmistakable authority. This was not a request, but a command. Eleanor saw varying reactions across the gathered, attuned emotions as ranging from curiosity to respect to lingering suspicion. She understood their wariness. Wolves were naturally protective of their territory, and she was an outsider. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said simply, her voice steady and warm. Emma tugged at her hand, urging her into the seat that had been saved. "Do you want blueberries in your pancakes? Cook makes them special if you ask." Eleanor smiled at the little girl, grateful for her uncomplicated acceptance. Blueberries sound wonderful. Breakfast passed in a blur of activity. The triplets monopolized much of Eleanor's attention, asking questions about her cabin, her herbs, the stories she sometimes told them when they encountered her on their walks. Their easy affection stood in stark contrast to the measured assessment of the adults around them. Sarah, seated nearby, offered gentle smiles of encouragement, while others in the pack approached one by one to introduce themselves. Each seemed to be forming their own opinion of the human woman their alpha had brought into their midst. Garrett handled the subtle politics with practiced ease, neither pushing Eleanor forward nor allowing her to be ignored. It was a delicate balance, and Eleanor found herself admiring his leadership skills. This was a man accustomed to managing complex social dynamics, to weighing the needs of many against the desires of individuals. As the meal drew to a close, Garrett leaned toward Eleanor. "Irving has agreed to meet with us. He rarely leaves his quarters these days, so we'll go to him." Eleanor nodded, dabbing her mouth with a napkin before rising. The triplets immediately protested. "But you just got here," Jack complained, his lower lip jutting out in a practiced pout. "Miss Ellie needs to talk with Grandpa Irving," Garrett explained patiently. "Adult business. You'll see her later." "Promise?" Emma asked, fixing Eleanor with those golden eyes so like her father's. "Promise," Eleanor replied, touched by the child's attachment. Perhaps I can tell you a story before bed tonight. This pacified the triplets, who allowed Sarah to lead them away for their morning lessons. Eleanor watched them go, surprised by how quickly they had worked their way under her defenses. She had never had children of her own, a consequence of career choices and circumstances, but had always felt a special connection to her younger patients during her nursing years. "This way," Garrett said, guiding her toward a corridor that led deeper into the house. "Irving's quarters are in the east wing. It's quieter there." The hallway they traversed was lined with photographs and portraits, a visual history of the Silver Ridge Pack. Eleanor slowed, drawn to the images. Recent color photographs gave way to older black and white ones, then to painted portraits of stern-faced individuals from earlier eras. All shared similar features, many with Garrett's golden eyes or strong jawline. His ancestors, she realized. The Alpha bloodline. "Your family has led this pack for generations," she observed. Garrett nodded, pride evident in his bearing. "Since 1784, when my ancestor Gabriel Blackwood established Silver Ridge as a sanctuary during the early westward expansion. The humans were beginning to push into traditional territories. Gabriel saw that we needed to adapt or perish." "A visionary," Eleanor said. "A pragmatist," Garrett corrected with a faint smile. "A quality that seems to run into the family." They turned down another corridor, this one quieter and warmer than the rest of the house. Gentle light filtered through stained glass windows, casting pools of color across the polished wood floor. The air carried the scent of old books, leather, and something medicinal that reminded Eleanor of her grandmother's remedies. At the end of the hallway stood an ornate door carved with images of wolves running beneath a full moon. Garrett knocked once, then opened it without waiting for a response. "He's expecting us," he explained as Eleanor hesitated. "His hearing isn't what it once was." The room beyond was a scholar's paradise, walls lined with bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, each shelf crammed with volumes ranging from modern hardcovers to ancient leather-bound tomes. A massive desk occupied one corner, its surface covered with open books, magnifying glasses, and handwritten marked notes. Near the windows, arranged to catch the morning light, sat several comfortable chairs surrounding a small table, and there, ensconced in what was clearly his habitual seat, sat Irving Steele. Eleanor's first impression was of fragility. The old wolf was thin, his body seeming almost too slight for the heavy woolen sweater he wore, despite the warmth of the room. White hair fell in soft waves to his shoulders, and a neatly trimmed beard covered his jaw. But as she approached, Eleanor revised her assessment. There was nothing fragile about those eyes, pale blue and sharp with intelligence, or the way he held himself spine straight despite his evident years. "So this is the boundary keeper who saved our pups," Irving said, his voice surprisingly strong and melodious for one who appeared so aged. "Come closer, child. Let me look at you properly." Child. The term might have been patronizing from anyone else, but from a man who had lived for 2 centuries, Eleanor supposed it was accurate enough. She moved forward, stopping before his chair. Irving studied her with unabashed interest, those pale eyes missing nothing. "You have her look about you," he said finally, "around the eyes and mouth. Eliza always did have a distinctive way of holding herself." Eleanor stiffened in shock. "You knew my grandmother?" A smile transformed Irving's weathered face, erasing decades. "Knew her, my dear. I taught her half of what she knew about herbcraft. The other half, of course, she taught me." He gestured to the chair opposite of his. "Sit, please. We have much to discuss, and these old bones don't stand as long as they once did." Eleanor sank into the indicated chair, mind reeling. Garrett took the seat beside her, his expression suggesting this revelation was as unexpected to him as it was to her. "Tea?" Irving asked, indicating a steaming pot on the table between them. When Eleanor nodded, he poured with surprisingly steady hands, passing her a delicate cup. "Chamomile and lavender with just a touch of lemon balm. Good for settling the nerves after confrontations with ancient evils." Despite everything, Eleanor smiled at his matter-of-fact tone. "You make it sound like a common occurrence." "More common than one might hope, less common than one might fear," Irving replied cryptically. "Now tell me exactly what transpired last night. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Eleanor recounted the events in detail, from her awakening at the cabin, to the confrontation with the shadow creature, to the strange connection she had felt when Garrett touched her wounded palm. Irving listened without interruption, those keen eyes watching her face, occasionally nodding as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. When she had finished, Irving set his teacup down carefully. "The Void Stalker," he said, naming the creature with evident distaste. "It has been nearly 70 years since one last breached our territory. They are ancient beings, neither good nor evil in human terms, but dangerous. They feed on life force blood, being merely the conduit. They honor bargains to the letter, while twisting their spirit." "It mentioned a bargain made by Catherine," Garrett said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "It suggested her death wasn't an accident." Irving's expression grew grave. "I feared as much. Catherine was troubled in the months before her death, obsessed with aging, with her fading beauty. She came to me asking about preservation magics, about ways to maintain youth. I warned her such magics always exact a terrible price. She made a deal with this thing," Eleanor said, the pieces fitting together, "offered her children's blood in exchange for immortal beauty, and then died before the bargain could be fulfilled," Irving confirmed, "leaving the debt unpaid. Such entities do not relinquish claims easily. It will return seeking payment in one form or another." "How do we fight it?" Garrett demanded, his hands clenching into fists on his knees. "How do I protect my children?" Irving's gaze shifted to Eleanor. "The protection spell you cast it held against the Void Stalker. Few modern practitioners could achieve such a feat." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, child, what do you know of your heritage? What did Eliza share with you?" Eleanor touched her pendant unconsciously. "Very little directly. My grandmother raised me after my mother left when I was 4. She taught me about herbs, about healing, about the old ways of connecting with nature. But she never spoke of my grandfather or her own parents. When she gave me this pendant before she died, she only said to remember who I was even when others forgot." Irving nodded as if her words confirmed a theory. "Eliza was protecting you. Mixed blood sometimes faces prejudice from both worlds. She thought it better you live fully in one than be caught between two." "Mixed blood," Eleanor repeated slowly. "You're saying my grandfather was a werewolf." "More than that," Irving said, glancing at Garrett. "Your grandfather was Gabriel Blackwood's youngest son, Julian. He fell in love with Eliza during a time when such unions were forbidden. They fled together, disappeared for many years. When Eliza returned, she carried an infant, your mother, but Julian was gone, presumed dead in the territorial wars." Eleanor felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. She looked at Garrett, seeing the same shock in his golden eyes. "We're related," she said numbly. "Distantly," Irving assured her. "Fifth cousins at most. Julian was from a branch of the family that diverged from Garrett's direct line over a century ago. The true bond wouldn't have formed otherwise. Such connections avoid close blood relations by their very nature." Garrett seemed to be processing this revelation, his expression shifting from shock to thoughtful consideration. "This explains the bond, the connection we felt. Eleanor carries Blackwood blood, however diluted." "Indeed," Irving said. "Blood calls to blood, especially in times of danger. Your children share this lineage, which is why Eleanor sensed the threat to them, why her protection magic works so effectively." Eleanor tried to reconcile this new understanding of herself with the identity she had carried for 65 years. She was human, had always thought of herself as completely human, yet apparently she carried the blood of werewolves of this very pack. It explains so much her affinity for healing, her comfort in solitude, her connection to the natural world. "Why didn't she tell me," she asked softly, "all those years, all those lessons, and she never once mentioned this part of my heritage?" Irving's eyes softened with compassion. "The times were different then, Eleanor. Mixed bloods were hunted by certain factions, both human and wolf. Eliza's silence was protection. She taught you what you needed to know to survive, to harness your gifts without drawing attention to your nature. And my mother, did she know? She knew. It's why she left. The burden of knowledge was too heavy for her to bear." Eleanor absorbed this feeling, and old pain resurfaced, then fade as understanding replaced abandonment. Her mother had been scared, overwhelmed by a reality she couldn't face. It didn't excuse her leaving, but it made more sense than the vague explanations her grandmother had offered. "Last night," Garrett said, bringing the conversation back to immediate concerns, "Eleanor's magic protected my children. Can it be expanded to shield the entire pack?" Irving considered this. "Potentially, though, it would require significant power. Boundary magic draws strength from the practitioner's life force. To shield an entire territory would be taxing." "I'm willing to try," Eleanor said firmly. if it means protecting the children and the pack. Irving studied her with those keen eyes. Your grandmother would be proud of the woman you have become, Eleanor Grace. She always believed you would find your way back to your heritage when the time was right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry to disturb you, Alpha, but the council has assembled. They're asking for you and Miss Grace. Garrett frowned. I didn't call a council meeting. Elder Marion did, Sarah explained, naming one of the senior pack members Eleanor had been introduced to at breakfast. After what happened last night, the council feels they need to be informed of the threat and any plans to address it. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Very well. We'll be there shortly. When Sarah had gone, he turned to Irving. Politics, he said, the word heavy with resignation. The council serves an important purpose, but their timing leaves something to be desired. Irving's lips curved in a knowing smile. Leadership was ever thus young Alpha, a constant balance between action and consultation. Go face them together, show a united front. I'll continue researching the Voidstalker, see if I can find more effective countermeasures. Eleanor rose, smoothing her borrowed clothes nervously. She had changed after breakfast into attire Sarah had provided, simple jeans and a soft sweater that fit reasonably well despite being intended for someone younger. How should I address the council, she asked Garrett as they left Irving's quarters. Honestly, he replied, they'll respect straightforward answers more than any attempt at politics. They're concerned about the pack's safety, as they should be. The council chamber was smaller than Eleanor had expected, an intimate room with a round table that seated 12. Large windows overlooked the forest, allowing natural light to fill the space. 10 individuals were already seated when they arrived, ranging in age from perhaps 30 to well into their 70s. Eleanor recognized several from breakfast, including Marion, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked auburn hair, who sat directly opposite the two empty chairs clearly meant for Garrett and herself. Conversation ceased as they entered. Garrett took his seat with the easy confidence of one accustomed to authority, gesturing for Eleanor to take the place beside him. She did so, back straight, hands folded calmly in her lap, meeting the assessing gazes around the table without flinching. Alpha, Marion began formally. We've called this meeting to address the events of last night and the continuing threat to our pack. Rumors are circulating. It would be best if the council heard the full account directly. Garrett nodded, then proceeded to describe what had happened, from the diversionary breach at the eastern border to Eleanor's intervention with the Voidstalker. He spoke clearly and concisely, neither dramatizing nor minimizing the danger. When he mentioned the creature's reference to Catherine and a broken bargain, Eleanor noted several council members exchanging significant looks. And you believe this human woman's magic can protect us? Asked an older man, his tone skeptical, but not dismissive. Eleanor Grace carries the blood of the Blackwood line, Garrett replied, causing a ripple of surprise around the table. Irving has confirmed her lineage. She is descended from Julian Blackwood, who was lost in the territorial wars. This revelation changed the atmosphere in the room. Several council members leaned forward, studying Eleanor with new interest. Julian's bloodline, Marion murmured. We thought it lost to us. Not lost, Eleanor said, speaking for the first time. Just hidden for protection. My grandmother Eliza raised me with knowledge of the old ways, though she never explained their origin. I've spent my life as a healer, first as a nurse in human hospitals, then practicing traditional medicine in retirement. A healer's path, nodded a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. Appropriate for one of mixed blood. The boundary keepers were often healers, able to work with both human and wolf physiologies. What I want to know, interjected a younger man with a prominent scar across his cheek, is how we fight this Voidstalker. If it's coming for the Alpha's children, it's a threat to the entire pack. We're researching countermeasures, Garrett said. Irving is environmenting old texts. Eleanor's protection magic proved effective last night, and we're exploring ways to extend that protection more broadly. And what of this true bond between you and Miss Grace? Marion asked, her piercing gaze moving between them. Several pack members noticed the energy exchange when you touched last night. Such bonds are rare and significant. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, surprised that this intimate connection had become a matter of council discussion. Garrett, however, seemed unperturbed. The bond exists, he confirmed. Its nature and implications are still becoming clear to us. For now, it serves as another connection between Eleanor and the pack, strengthening her ability to help protect us. The council members murmured among themselves, and Eleanor sensed that, while the bond raised questions, it also lent her a legitimacy in their eyes she might otherwise have lacked. Pack politics were clearly complex with traditions and expectations she was only beginning to understand. The meeting continued for another hour with detailed discussions of security measures, patrol schedules, and the potential for support from allied packs if needed. Throughout, Eleanor was impressed by the council's pragmatism and Garrett's leadership. Despite their initial wariness, they accepted her presence and potential contribution without dwelling on her outsider status. The safety of the pack, particularly the children, overrode other concerns. When they finally emerged from the council chamber, Eleanor felt emotionally drained but satisfied with the outcome. The council had agreed to her continued presence in the pack house and supported the research into combating the Void Stalker. "You handled that well," Garrett commented as they walked toward the main hall. "The council can be intimidating even to those raised in pack politics." "I've faced hospital boards and emergency room crises," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "Different contexts, similar dynamics. People concerned about those in their care trying to make the best decisions with limited information." Garrett studied her with newfound appreciation. "You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Grace." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted ahead of them. Sarah appeared running down the corridor, face pale with alarm. "Alpha," she called, "come quickly. Something's happened to the children." Eleanor's heart lurched as they hurried after Sarah toward the playroom where the triplets spent their mornings. Inside, they found Emma sitting on the floor, her small body trembling, while her brothers hovered anxiously nearby. Their teacher, a young woman named Lisa, was attempting to comfort the little girl without success. "She just started shaking," Lisa explained worriedly. Then she began talking strangely, saying she could see shadows coming. Garrett knelt beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his. "Emma, sweetheart, Daddy's here. What's wrong?" Emma's golden eyes seemed unfocused, looking at something none of them could see. "They're in the trees," she whispered, "watching us, waiting. They want to take us away, like the Shadow Man said." Eleanor felt a chill at the child's words. She moved to Emma's other side instinct, guiding her actions. "Emma," she said gently, "it's Miss Ellie. Can you tell me what you're seeing?" Emma's gaze shifted toward Eleanor, recognition slowly dawning. "Miss Ellie," she breathed, "you have the blue light. It keeps the shadows away." "Oh, that's right," Eleanor said soothingly. "The blue light protects you. Can you show me where the shadows are?" The little girl pointed toward the window. "In the forest. They're waiting for night. They think we can't see them, but I can." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Garrett, concern mirrored in his eyes. "She's sensitive," she murmured. "Psychically gifted, perhaps, if she carries the boundary blood as I do." Garrett nodded in understanding. "Emma has always been different, more aware of things others don't see." Catherine dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Eleanor turned back to the child. "Emma, I'm going to check if there really are shadows in the forest. Will you help me?" Emma nodded solemnly. Eleanor removed her pendant, the silver wolf with sapphire eyes, and placed it gently in the little girl's palm. "Hold this for me. It will help you focus and stay safe while I look." Well, with the child occupied, Eleanor moved to the window, extending her senses as her grandmother had taught her so many years ago. She had rarely used this ability, finding it overwhelming in populated areas. But here, focused on the forest, she let her awareness expand beyond normal perception. At first, she detected nothing unusual, just the natural energy of the woodland. Then, as she concentrated harder, she felt it, a wrongness, a cold void in the living tapestry of the forest. Not one, but several points of unnatural emptiness waiting just beyond the tree line. "She's right," Eleanor said quietly, returning to Garrett's side. "There's something out there. Not the Void Stalker itself, I think, but smaller entities of similar nature. Scouts, perhaps." Garrett's expression hardened. "I'll double the patrols, bring everyone inside the main compound before dusk." He touched Emma's hair gently. "You did well, little one. You helped us see the danger." Emma looked up at her father, her trembling subsiding. "The bad things won't get us." "No, sweetheart. We won't let them." His gaze met Eleanor's, determination evident. "Miss Ellie and I will protect you." "With the blue light," Emma said, some of her usual brightness returning. "With the blue light," Eleanor confirmed, reclaiming her pendant and placing it around her own neck once more. "And many other kinds of protection, too." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Garrett organized the pack's defenses, positioning warriors strategically around the property, bringing in those who lived in outlying cabins. Eleanor divided her time between researching with Irving and preparing protective herbs and poultices. By late afternoon, she had created dozens of small protection pouches, similar to the ones she had used the previous night, distributing them to be placed at windows and doorways throughout the main house. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, giving her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since retiring from nursing. Here her knowledge was valued, her abilities recognized. The pack members who had viewed her with suspicion at breakfast now approached with respect, asking questions about the protections, offering assistance where they could. As evening approached, Eleanor found herself in the kitchen brewing a large pot of tea infused with calming herbs. The tension in the house was palpable, especially among those with children. A little anxiety was warranted given the threat, but too much could be counterproductive. Sarah found her there looking harried but determined. "The Alpha is asking for you. He's in the war room with the senior warriors planning for tonight." Eleanor nodded, pouring the tea into a large carafe. "I'll bring this with me. Many of them have been on edge all day. It will help clear their thinking." The war room turned out to be a modern conference room on the first floor, its walls covered with maps of the territory and surrounding areas. Garrett stood at the head of a long table, surrounded by a dozen of his most trusted warriors, discussing patrol rotations and communication protocols. He looked up when Eleanor entered, relief evident in his expression. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing her forward, "I was just explaining your assessment of the entities Emma sensed." She set the carafe and cups on a side table before joining him at the map. "I believe they're lesser servants of the Void Stalker sent to scout our defenses. They lack the power of their master, but share its nature, existing partly in our world and partly in shadow." "Can they breach the house?" asked the scarred warrior from the council meeting. "Not if the protections hold," Eleanor replied. "The pouches I've distributed create a barrier against shadow entities. They should prevent anything of their nature from crossing thresholds or windows." "Should?" another warrior questioned skeptically. "No defense is absolute," Eleanor acknowledged, "but these are ancient protections proven effective against such threats for centuries. Combined with your physical security, they create layers that would be difficult to penetrate." Garrett nodded approvingly at her candid assessment. "We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. 4-hour patrol rotations, 2-person teams, no one goes alone. All children remain in the central wing tonight with both magical and physical protection." The meeting continued as they refined plans, considering contingencies, ensuring everyone understood their roles. Throughout, Eleanor was struck by the seamless integration of traditional pack security with her magical protections. These wolves were pragmatic, willing to use whatever tools would keep their people safe. As night fell, the pack gathered for dinner in the main hall, a more subdued affair than breakfast had been. Children sat close to their parents', conversations were quieter, and many glanced frequently toward the darkened windows. The triplets insisted on sitting with Eleanor and Garrett, sensing the tension but finding comfort in their presence. "Will you tell us a story tonight, Miss Ellie?" Lucas asked as they finished their meal. "You promised." "I did promise," Eleanor agreed, meeting Garrett's gaze over the children's heads. "And I always keep my promises." Later, after the children had been settled in the central wing, Eleanor sat in a rocking chair between the triplets' beds, her voice soft in the dim light as she told them a story her grandmother had shared with her long ago. It was a tale of a brave wolf who outwitted a shadow thief, driving it from the forest through cleverness rather than strength alone. The children listened raptly, finding courage in the narrative, until their eyes grew heavy and sleep claimed them one by one. Garrett stood in the doorway watching. When the last child had drifted off, he approached silently, his expression unreadable in the low light. "You're good with them," he observed quietly as they left the room together. "They trust you implicitly." "Children often sense more than adults give them credit for," Eleanor replied. "They know when someone genuinely cares for their well-being." They paused in the hallway, the sounds of the pack preparing for night watches echoing distantly. "Emma's sensitivity," Eleanor said. "Has she shown such abilities before?" Garrett nodded slowly. "Since she was very young, she sees things others don't, knows things she shouldn't. Catherine wanted to suppress it, feared it would make Emma an outsider within the pack." "It's a gift," Eleanor said firmly, "a rare and valuable one. She should be taught to understand and control it, not hide it." "I agree," Garrett said, "but I lack the knowledge to guide her properly." "Catherine." He trailed off, pain evident in his expression. Eleanor understood. His mate had kept secrets, made terrible choices that now endangered their children. Whatever love they had shared was now tainted by betrayal. "I could work with Emma," she offered tentatively. "My grandmother taught me some techniques for managing sensory abilities. They helped me during my nursing career when emotions and energies could become overwhelming in hospital settings." Gratitude shone in Garrett's eyes. "I would appreciate that. Emma needs guidance from someone who understands what she's experiencing." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when a young warrior approached to report that the first patrol rotation had begun. As he departed, Eleanor found herself studying Garrett's profile, noting the strength evident in his bearing, but also the weight of responsibility he carried. An alpha's duty was never simple, especially one with children to protect. "You should rest," he said, catching her gaze. "Tomorrow may bring new challenges." "As should you," she countered. "A tired alpha makes poor decisions." A smile touched his lips. "Advice I give others, but rarely follow myself." "Then perhaps you need someone to remind you occasionally." The words slipped out before she could reconsider them, more familiar than she had intended. Rather than taking offense, Garrett's smile deepened. "Perhaps I do." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. The true bond hummed gently, a connection neither had sought, but both were beginning to value. Then reality intruded as Sarah appeared at the end of the hallway, her expression urgent. "Alpha Irving is asking for both of you. He says it's important." They found the old wolf in his quarters, surrounded by ancient texts, his eyes bright with discovery despite the late hour. "I believe I've found something," he said without preamble as they entered. "A ritual of containment used against a void stalker nearly 4 centuries ago in Scotland." He indicated a yellowed manuscript on his desk, its pages covered in faded ink. "According to this account, a boundary keeper named Moira Fraser trapped a void stalker using a combination of blood magic and lunar energy. The ritual required the combined power of human and wolf bloodlines channeled through a focus object with personal significance to both." "Like my pendant," Eleanor said, touching the silver wolf at her throat. Irving nodded. "Precisely. The ritual created not just a temporary barrier, but a permanent binding, trapping the entity in an object that could then be secured where it could do no harm." Hope kindled in Garrett's eyes. "This could be the solution we need, not just protection, but elimination of the threat entirely." "There is a cost," Irving cautioned, his expression grave. "Such magic demands sacrifice. Moira Fraser survived the ritual, but lost her connection to her wolf heritage. Her boundary abilities were burned away in the process." Eleanor absorbed this, considering the implications. To lose the heritage she had only just discovered, the abilities she was only beginning to understand. Yet what was that compared to the safety of the children of the entire pack? "Would the same price apply in my case?" she asked. "My wolf blood is already diluted by generations." Irving's gaze was sympathetic. "I cannot say with certainty. The principles of equivalent exchange suggest the cost would be proportional to the power expended. But magic, especially blood magic, follows its own rules." Garrett looked troubled. "There must be another way, one that doesn't require such sacrifice." "We have time to explore alternatives," Irving assured them. "The protective measures Eleanor has implemented will hold for now. I'll continue researching, looking for less costly methods." As they left Irving's quarters, Eleanor sensed Garrett's concern. "I would do it," she said quietly. "If it came to that, I would make the sacrifice willingly." Garrett stopped, turning to face her fully. "You've only just discovered your heritage, only begun to explore what it means to carry the Blackwood blood. To lose that connection. To save innocent lives." Eleanor shook her head. "That's no choice at all. I've lived 65 years without knowing my true nature. If necessary, I can continue doing so." Garrett studied her face in the dim hallway light, something like wonder in his expression. "Your courage humbles me, Eleanor Grace." Before she could respond, a distant howl pierced the night, a sound of alarm that raised the hair on the back of Eleanor's neck. Garrett tensed, instantly alert. "The northern perimeter," he said, already moving toward the main hall. "Something's breached our defenses." Warriors were mobilizing as they reached the ground floor. Weapons being distributed, communications devices checked. Garrett issued rapid orders, organizing a response while ensuring the central wing remained heavily guarded. I'm coming with you, Eleanor said firmly when he turned to her. It's too dangerous, he began, but she cut him off. If it's the Void Stalker or its servants, you will need my knowledge. The warrior's weapons may be useless against such entities. Reluctantly, Garrett nodded. Stay close to me. If I give the order to retreat, you follow it without question. Agreed, she said, retrieving her satchel of herbs and remedies from where she'd left it earlier. Let's go. They moved swiftly through the night, Garrett leading a group of 10 warriors toward the northern perimeter where the alarm had been raised. The forest loomed dark and threatening around them, moonlight filtering through the canopy in silver patches. Eleanor kept pace despite her age, adrenaline, and determination driving her forward. They found 2 warriors at the perimeter line, one supporting his injured companion. Blood stained the wounded man's shirt, 3 parallel gashes visible through the torn fabric. Shadow creatures, he gasped as they approached. 5 or 6 of them. Not like anything I've ever seen. Claws like ice. They came out of nowhere. Eleanor knelt beside him, examining the wounds. Hold still, she instructed, reaching into her satchel for herbs to cleanse and numb the injury. As she worked, she extended her senses, searching for the malevolent emptiness she had detected earlier. They're still here, she said quietly to Garrett. Watching us, waiting. Garrett signaled his warriors to form a defensive perimeter. Can you sense where? Eleanor closed her eyes, concentrating. There, she said after a moment, pointing toward a dense thicket about 50 yards away. And there, another indication, this time toward a massive fallen tree. They're surrounding us. As if her words had summoned them, the shadows began to move. Not the natural shadows of the forest, but darker patches that flowed against the wind, gathering substance as they approached. They were smaller than the Voidstalker had been, but similar in their wrongness, their violation of natural law. Hold your positions, Garrett commanded his warriors. Standard formations. Eleanor completed her treatment of the injured man, then rose to stand beside Garrett, removing her pendant. I can create a barrier, but it will only last as long as I can maintain focus. She began the now familiar ritual, blood and words of power, but this time directing the energy outward to encompass their entire group. Blue light spread from her hands, forming a dome of protection around them. The shadow creatures halted at the barrier's edge, testing it with elongated limbs that recoiled from the light. They circled, seeking weakness, their movements becoming increasingly agitated. They're scouts, Eleanor said through gritted teeth, the effort of maintaining the barrier evident in her voice. Sent to test our defenses to find a way to the children. Can you hold the barrier while we retreat? Garrett asked, concern evident as he noticed her growing strain. Yes, she managed, but we need to move quickly. They began a strategic withdrawal, the injured warriors in the center, Eleanor and Garrett bringing up the rear. The shadow creatures followed, pressing against the barrier, searching for any falter in Eleanor's concentration. Halfway back to the main house, disaster struck. Eleanor, her focus divided between maintaining the barrier and navigating the uneven forest floor, caught her foot on an exposed root. She stumbled, her concentration breaking momentarily. The blue barrier flickered, and in that instant, one of the shadow creatures lunged through the weakness. It struck with unnatural speed, claws raking toward Eleanor's face. Garrett moved faster, intercepting the attack with his own body. The creature's claws tore through his shirt, drawing blood across his chest. He roared in pain and fury, shifting partially, his hands becoming claws that tore through the shadow entity, dispersing it into wisps of darkness. Eleanor recovered her balance, reinforcing the barrier just as the other creatures tried to exploit the breach. The renewed protection drove them back, but the damage was done. Garrett's wounds smoked slightly, the edges of the gashes turning an alarming gray color. Poison, Eleanor gasped, recognizing the supernatural infection. We need to get back now. The warriors closed ranks around them, moving with greater urgency toward the safety of the main house. The shadow creatures continued their pursuit, but seemed unwilling to press another attack after seeing one of their number destroyed. By the time they reached the house, Garrett was leaning heavily on Eleanor, his breathing labored skin pale beneath his tan. The wound was spreading gray tendrils, extending outward from the gashes across his chest. Medical room, Eleanor commanded as they entered, her nurse's authority surfacing automatically. And bring my full kit from the guest room. Now. Warriors scrambled to obey as she guided Garrett to the pack's well-equipped medical facility. She helped him onto an examination table, cutting away his ruined shirt to reveal the full extent of the injury. Shadow poison, she murmured, examining the wound with professional detachment despite her inner turmoil. It feeds on life force spreads through the body's energy pathways. Can you treat it? Sarah asked from the doorway, her face pale with worry. Yes, Eleanor said, with more confidence than she felt. But I'll need space and quiet, keep everyone out except those bringing my supplies. As Sarah left to enforce this directive, Eleanor turned back to Garrett. His golden eyes were clouded with pain but still alert. This will hurt, she warned him. Shadow poison must be drawn out, not just treated superficially. He managed a tight smile. Do what you must. Eleanor began the delicate process of treating the supernatural wound, combining her nursing knowledge with her grandmother's teachings. She cleansed the physical injury first, then prepared a poultice of herbs specifically formulated to counter dark energies. As she worked, she hummed softly an ancient melody her grandmother had taught her, focusing her intent through sound as well as touch. The most difficult part came last. Shadow poison had to be drawn out through the same pathways it had entered. Eleanor placed her hands directly on Garrett's chest, one on either side of the wound, and closed her eyes, seeking the energy channels beneath his skin. There it was, a cold wrongness flowing through his natural warmth. Eleanor directed her own energy downward, creating a pathway for the poison to follow. The process was excruciating for both of them, Garrett's muscles tensing against the pain, Eleanor's face beating with sweat as she absorbed and neutralized the toxic energy. Minutes stretched into an hour as she worked, drawing out the poison bit by bit, transferring it into a crystalline bowl of salt water where it dissipated harmlessly. Finally, when the last traces had been extracted, Eleanor opened her eyes to find Garrett watching her with an expression of profound gratitude. Thank you, he said simply. Eleanor nodded, too exhausted for words. The effort had drained her completely, leaving her lightheaded and weak. As she tried to step back from the table, her knees buckled. Garrett, despite his own condition, moved with werewolf speed to catch her before she fell. You've done enough, he said, helping her to a chair beside the examination table. More than enough. Eleanor leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. The shadow creatures gone, came Irving's voice from the doorway. Retreated when they lost their connection to you, Garrett. It seems they were specifically targeting the Alpha, trying to incapacitate our leadership. The old wolf entered the room, his keen eyes assessing both patients. The Void Stalker grows more strategic, he observed grimly. First reconnaissance, then an attempt to remove our strongest defender. It's escalating its efforts. The children, Garrett asked, sitting up despite his injury. Safe, Irving assured him. The central wing remains secure both physically and magically. But this attack confirms what we suspected. The entity won't be satisfied until it claims what it believes it's owed. Eleanor opened her eyes, determination overcoming her exhaustion. Then we need to be ready when it comes. Not just with defenses, but with a way to end this threat permanently. Irving nodded, his expression grave but resolute. I'll continue researching the containment ritual. There may be ways to modify it to reduce the personal cost. And I'll work with the warriors, Garrett added, developing strategies to combat these shadow servants effectively. As Irving departed to return to his research, Eleanor found herself alone with Garrett. He reached out, taking her hand in his. You saved my life tonight, he said quietly. You saved mine first, she reminded him with a small smile, when you intercepted that creature's attack. His fingers tightened around hers. I acted on instinct, the thought of you being harmed. He shook his head, unable to complete the sentence. The bond, Eleanor suggested. More than that, I think. His golden eyes held hers, earnest and unguarded. In just 2 days you become essential to this pack, to my children. To me. The admission hung between them, honest and undemanding. Eleanor felt something shift within her heart, a lifetime of professional detachment and solitary independence, giving way to new possibilities. Rest now, she said gently, squeezing his hand before releasing it. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. As she left the medical room, Eleanor paused in the hallway, touching her pendant thoughtfully. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with danger and difficult choices. The Void Stalker would return stronger and more determined. The ritual Irving had discovered might require sacrifices she was only beginning to understand the value of. Yet for the first time in many years, Eleanor didn't feel alone in facing the unknown. She had found connection here, purpose, perhaps even belonging. Whatever came next, she would face it alongside Garrett, in his pack, her newfound family. With that thought warming her, despite her exhaustion, Eleanor made her way toward her room, preparing herself for the battles yet to come. Dawn broke over the Silver Ridge territory, pale light filtering through morning mist that clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers. Eleanor stood at the window of her guest room, watching as night reluctantly surrendered today. She had slept little, her mind churning with all she had learned, all that was at stake. The attack the previous night had made the threat painfully real, the shadow poison that had nearly claimed Garrett a stark reminder of what they faced. Her hands still tingled from drawing out that poison, from channeling dark energy through her own body before dispersing it safely. Such healing took a toll, and Eleanor felt the weight of her 65 years in the ache of her muscles, the heaviness of her bones. Yet beneath the physical exhaustion burned a fierce determination that age had not diminished. A soft knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. Sarah entered at her acknowledgement, carrying a tray with coffee and breakfast. "Irving asked me to bring this to you," she explained, setting the tray on a small table. "He said you'd need your strength today." Eleanor smiled gratefully. "Thank you. How is Garrett this morning?" "Recovering well, thanks to you. Werewolves heal quickly, but without your intervention." Sarah shook her head, leaving the grim possibility unspoken. "The pack is talking about what you did. Even those who were skeptical about a human in our midst are reconsidering their position." "I'm not entirely human, it seems," Eleanor said wryly, pouring coffee into a delicate cup. The rich aroma helped clear the fog of fatigue from her mind. Sarah hesitated, then said, "If I may ask, how does it feel? Learning about your heritage, so suddenly discovering abilities you never knew you had." Eleanor considered the question, appreciating its thoughtfulness. "Disorienting," she admitted. "Like opening a door in a familiar house and finding a room that wasn't there before. Everything I thought I knew about myself is still true, but incomplete." She sipped her coffee, finding it prepared exactly as she preferred. "At the same time, it explains so much. Little mysteries and oddities throughout my life suddenly make sense." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The children are asking for you, especially Emma. She's been drawing pictures all morning of what she calls the blue light lady." This brought a smile to Eleanor's face. "I'll come see them after I've eaten and spoken with Irving. There's much to prepare for." After Sarah departed, Eleanor ate quickly, then dressed in clothes that had been provided for her, simple but well-made garments that suited her practical nature. The silver pendant, her grandmother's final gift, seemed heavier around her neck today, its significance magnified by all she had learned. She found Irving in his study, surrounded by ancient texts and modern notebooks filled with his spidery handwriting. The old wolf looked as though he hadn't slept at all, but his pale blue eyes remained sharp and alert. "Ah, Eleanor," he greeted her. "I've been expecting you. How are you feeling after last night's healing work?" "Tired but functional," she replied honestly, taking the seat he indicated. "Have you made progress with the containment ritual?" Irving's expression grew solemn. "The principle of equivalent exchange cannot be circumvented entirely. To bind something as powerful as a void stalker requires significant energy." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "However, I believe I've found a way to distribute the cost, to share the burden, so it doesn't fall entirely on you." Hope kindled in Eleanor's chest. "How?" "The true bond between you and Garrett creates a channel through which energy can flow in both directions. If he willingly participates in the ritual, his werewolf vitality could supplement your boundary magic, potentially preserving your connection to your heritage." Eleanor considered this. "Would it put Garrett at risk?" "Some risk, yes," Irving acknowledged. "He would experience significant pain and temporary weakness. But unlike you, he wouldn't risk losing an essential part of himself." It was a better option than Eleanor had dared hope for, though still not without cost. "Have you discussed this with him?" "Not yet. I wanted your thoughts first, as you would still bear the greater burden." Eleanor nodded, appreciating his consideration. "I'm willing if he is. When should we attempt this?" "The ritual would be most powerful under the full moon," Irving said, consulting an astronomical chart on his desk, "which fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, is tonight. The Void Stalker will be at the height of its power, but so will our countermeasures." As Irving explained the ritual in greater detail, Eleanor found herself studying the old wolf with new eyes. There was something he wasn't telling her, some shadow behind his careful explanations. She had spent decades reading patients' faces, learning to recognize when information was being withheld. "Irving," she said, gently interrupting his explanation of the ritual circle, "what aren't you telling me?" The old wolf paused, his weathered face revealing nothing for a long moment. Then he sighed, shoulders dropping slightly, as if a weight had settled more firmly upon them. You have her perception as well, he said with a sad smile. Eliza could always tell when I was holding something back. He rose from his chair, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner of his study. From it, he withdrew a small wooden box intricately carved with symbols similar to those on Eleanor's pendant. I've known since the moment you arrived that this day would come, he said, returning to place the box on the table between them. The Voidstalker's appearance, your discovery of your heritage, the true bond with Garrett, none of these are coincidences. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. What do you mean? Irving opened the box, revealing a smaller version of Eleanor's pendant, a silver wolf with sapphire eyes. Though this one showed signs of great age, the silver tarnished in places, the eyes dulled. This was your grandmother's, he said softly, given to her by Julian Blackwood when their bond was recognized. I was there that day as witness and guardian. You were more than that to her, Eleanor said, sudden understanding dawning. Weren't you? Irving's eyes met hers, ancient and filled with memories. I was her teacher, her protector, and yes, her friend. When she fled with Julian, I helped create the story that they had disappeared together. In truth, I knew where they were all along. I visited them, continued her training, watched your mother grow. Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? Some truths require the right moment, Irving replied, and some sacrifices must be made willingly with full knowledge. Eleanor's instincts flared. What sacrifice, Irving? What aren't you telling me about tonight's ritual? The old wolf was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window to the forest beyond. The containment ritual will require 3 elements: your boundary magic, Garrett's alpha power, and a third component to seal and stabilize the binding. And that third component, a willing sacrifice, Irving said simply. Someone who exists between worlds, who has seen enough time pass to value what truly matters. Someone whose life force carries the memory of ancient days, who has lived long enough to recognize when their final purpose arrives. Horror dawned as Eleanor realized what he was saying. No, Irving, no. There must be another way. There isn't, he said gently. I've had 2 centuries to consider this moment, Eleanor. I've lived a full life longer than any wolf has a right to. When I sensed the Voidstalker's return, I knew why I had been preserved for so long. He smiled, the expression transforming his ancient face. Every boundary keeper needs a guardian, someone who prepares the way. I was your grandmother's, and now, at the end, I am yours. Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes. You can't ask me to accept this. I'm not asking, Irving said firmly. I'm informing you of what will happen. The choice is already made, has been made for longer than you have been alive. He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. What matters now is that we prepare properly, that we ensure the sacrifice serves its purpose fully. Before Eleanor could respond, a knock came at the door. Garrett entered, his powerful presence filling the room instantly. One look at their faces told him something significant had transpired. What's happened? He asked, gaze moving between them. Irving released Eleanor's hands, turning to face the Alpha. I was just explaining the final component of the ritual to Eleanor. It's time you knew as well. As Irving repeated his explanation, Eleanor watched Garrett's expression shift from confusion to denial to grim understanding. The Alpha had known Irving his entire life. The old wolf had been elder advisor and teacher to generations of Blackwoods. There must be another option, Garrett insisted when Irving finished. If there were, don't you think I would have found it in 2 centuries of searching, Irving replied mildly. The laws of magic are immutable, Garrett. A binding of this magnitude requires life force freely given. It cannot be taken, only offered. The 3 sat in heavy silence, each processing the weight of what lay ahead. Finally, Eleanor spoke. If this is truly the only way, then we must ensure it succeeds, she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her heart. We owe Irving that much. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he nodded in agreement. What do we need to do? Irving's expression lightened, as if relieved that the hard truth had been spoken. First, we prepare the ritual site. Then we lure the Voidstalker to the stone circle at midnight. And then, he smiled faintly, I fulfill my purpose. The preparations took the remainder of the day, a flurry of activity that left little time for dwelling on what was to come. Eleanor divided her time between assisting Irving with the ritual components and spending precious moments with the triplets, especially Emma. The little girl seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, her golden eyes solemn as she sat beside Eleanor in the garden, learning simple exercises to help control her sensitivity. Like this, Emma asked, closing her eyes and breathing deeply as Eleanor had shown her. Perfect, Eleanor affirmed. When the world feels too big, too loud, you can always return to your breath. It's your anchor. Emma opened her eyes, studying Eleanor with uncanny perception. You're sad, she said simply. Eleanor didn't deny it. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes even grown-ups feel sad. Because of Grandpa Irving. Eleanor's breath caught. What about Grandpa Irving? Emma's small face grew serious. He's going away. To the stars. I saw it in my dream. Fighting back tears, Eleanor pulled the child into a gentle embrace. Your gift is very strong, Emma. Remember what we talked about. How seeing things others don't can be both wonderful and difficult. Emma nodded against her shoulder. It's special, not scary. That's right. Eleanor smoothed the child's dark curls. And Grandpa Irving is making a very special, very brave choice. Because he loves you and your brothers and your father and all of the pack. And you, Emma added, pulling back to look at Eleanor's oyster eyes. He loves you too. Yes, Eleanor whispered. He does. As evening approached, final preparations accelerated. The council gathered for one last meeting, reviewing the defense strategy and evacuation plans should the ritual fail. Warriors prepared weapons specially treated to harm shadow creatures. The most vulnerable pack members, including all children, were secured in the central wing of the house, surrounded by protective wards Eleanor had created. Throughout it all, Irving moved with surprising vigor for one so ancient, directing, advising, ensuring everything was in place for the night ahead. If others noticed his unusual energy, his almost lighthearted demeanor, they attributed it to the urgency of the situation, rather than the peace of one who has accepted his fate. As twilight deepened toward night, Eleanor found herself alone with Irving in the garden, a rare moment of quiet amid the preparations. I have something for you, the old wolf said, drawing a small leather pouch from his pocket. This was meant to be passed to you eventually. Tonight seems appropriate. Eleanor accepted the pouch, opening it to find a delicate silver chain with a small crystal pendant, clear as water, but with blue fire seemingly trapped within. It's beautiful, she said, looking up at Irving questioningly. It belonged to Julian, Irving explained. Your grandfather made it for Eliza, a symbol of their bond. After he died, she couldn't bear to wear it, but she kept it for your mother, who in turn left it behind when she departed. I've held it in trust, waiting for the right moment, the right bearer. Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. Irving, I don't know what to say. Say that you'll remember, he replied simply. Not just me, but all of us who came before. The boundary keepers, the guardians, the ones who walk between worlds. Say that you'll pass on what you know to Emma, who carries the gift more strongly than any I've seen in generations. I promise, Eleanor whispered, clutching the pendant tightly. Irving smiled satisfaction in his ancient eyes. Then my work is nearly complete. He gazed up at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. It's a good night for an ending, and for a beginning. The journey to the stone circle was conducted in solemn silence, warriors moving ahead and behind their small group, alert for any sign of the shadow servants. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they passed animals, falling silent leaves stilling their rustle, as if the very woods knew what was to come. Eleanor walked beside Garrett, both of them flanking Irving, who moved with determined steps despite his apparent frailty. The old wolf carried a wooden staff carved with symbols that matched those in his books, its surface polished by centuries of handling. The stone circle awaited them in a natural clearing, massive monoliths thrust up from the earth like the vertebrae of some enormous beast. Moonlight gleamed on their weathered surfaces, illuminating carved symbols nearly eroded by centuries of exposure. As they approached, Eleanor felt the change in the air, a subtle pressure against her skin, a humming in her bones that spoke of ancient power and thin boundaries between worlds. Irving moved to the center of the circle, directing the placement of candles, herbs, and crystals with precise instructions. The Void Stalker will be drawn here by the power convergence, he explained as they worked, especially once we begin the ritual. The energies we raise will act as both beacon and lure. Warriors established a perimeter around the clearing weapons, ready expressions grim but determined. Garrett conferred briefly with his second-in-command, a tall woman named Diane whose tactical insight had impressed Eleanor during the council meeting. As the final preparations were completed, Irving drew Eleanor and Garrett to the center of the circle. "It is almost time," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "Eleanor, your pendant." With a pang of reluctance, Eleanor removed her silver wolf pendant, the companion of so many years. She placed it carefully on the flat stone at the center of the circle that might once have been an altar. "When the Void Stalker appears," Irving instructed, "you must allow it to approach the circle's center to believe it is about to feed. Only when it is fully committed can the binding take hold." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with unspoken emotion. She wanted to plead with Irving one last time to search for another way, but the certainty in his eyes stopped her. This was a path he had accepted long ago, perhaps even before she was born. The moon climbed higher, its light intensifying as it approached the zenith. Eleanor felt the power building around them within her, a pressure seeking release. Her heritage, so recently discovered, sang in her blood, recognizing this place, this moment, as something it had been waiting for. "Irving," Garrett said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion, "the pack owes you a debt we can never repay." The old wolf smiled, genuine affection in his pale eyes. "You have led with wisdom and strength, Garrett Blackwood. Your ancestors would be proud. Now take your position. It begins." As if summoned by his words, a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying the scent of grave dirt and rotting leaves. The moonlight dimmed as if something were drawing the illumination into itself, consuming it. At the edge of the trees, darkness gathered, coalescing into a form taller and more substantial than the shadow servants they had faced before. "It's here," Eleanor whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. The Void Stalker stepped into the clearing, its form more defined than during their previous encounter. It appeared almost human now, though wrongly proportioned, limbs too long, torso too narrow, head tilted at an impossible angle. Its eyes remained hollow pits in a face like weathered bark, but they fixed unerringly on the silver pendant gleaming in the moonlight. "Boundary Keeper," it hissed, the words forming in the air rather than emerging from its semblance of a mouth. "Wolf Alpha, you invite me to this place of power. Unwise." "We offer an alternative," Garrett replied, his voice steady despite the unnatural cold emanating from the entity. "A new bargain to replace the one Catherine broke." The Voidstalker paused, hollow eyes shifting to Garrett. "The bargain was not broken, merely delayed. The mother died before payment was complete. The debt remained. 3 young lives rich with potential. Alpha blood sweet and potent." Eleanor stepped forward, drawing the entity's attention. "Blood has been spilled already," she said, indicating the wounds on Garrett's chest, still healing from the shadow poison. "Alpha blood freely given in defense of what is his. Would this not satisfy your claim?" The creature tilted its head, further bones crackling audibly with the movement. "Interesting. A partial payment, perhaps, but insufficient for the power promised. The bargain requires completion." "Then complete it with me," Eleanor said firmly. "I carry the Blackwood blood, diluted but authentic. I offer it freely in exchange for releasing all claims on the children." The Voidstalker drifted closer, its form shifting and flowing like smoke, given temporary substance. "Your blood, Boundary Keeper. Old and wise, touched by magic and experience. Valuable, yes. But in what quantity? How much would you surrender?" "Enough to satisfy honor," Eleanor replied carefully. "But not life itself, a tithe freely given." The entity considered this, its hollow eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Show me this offering. Let me taste its quality before agreeing to your terms." This was the moment of greatest danger Irving had warned. The entity must believe itself on the verge of feeding, must come fully into the circle seeking sustenance. Only then could the binding ritual trap it completely. Eleanor extended her hand, the same small silver knife she had used for protection magic poised above her palm. With deliberate slowness, she drew the blade across her skin, allowing blood to well up, gleaming black in the moonlight. The Voidstalker made a sound like winter wind through dead branches, hunger and anticipation mingled. It moved forward, entering the perimeter marked by herbs and crystals. The warriors tensed, but held their positions as instructed. "Now, Garrett," Eleanor said quietly as the Voidstalker reached for her bleeding hand. Garrett grasped her other hand, completing the circuit. Eleanor began the ritual words, ancient syllables that felt both foreign and familiar on her tongue. Knowledge passed through generations of boundary keepers. Garrett joined her, his deeper voice harmonizing with hers, the true bond between them flaring to life. The Voidstalker froze, realization dawning too late. Deception, it hissed, trying to retreat. But the circle had closed around it, power flowing through the standing stones, through Eleanor and Garrett, through the very earth beneath their feet. Blue light erupted from the pendant, expanding outward to form a dome that trapped the entity at its center. It fought furiously, its form shifting and stretching as it sought escape, claws of shadow raking against the magical barrier. The pressure of its resistance transferred through the bond to Eleanor and Garrett, manifesting as physical pain that threatened to break their concentration. Eleanor gritted her teeth, maintaining the flow of ritual words despite the agony building in her chest. Beside her, Garrett growled, partial transformation rippling across his features as his wolf nature responded to the threat. The Voidstalker howled, a sound that existed partly in this world and partly beyond, rattling the standing stones and sending wildlife fleeing for miles around. It gathered itself for one final assault against the barrier, drawing on reserves of power that made the air shimmer with distortion. Now, Irving called, stepping forward into the center of the circle. The binding is ready. The old wolf raised his staff, striking it against the stone altar where Eleanor's pendant lay. A shockwave of pure energy radiated outward from the impact, momentarily freezing everything within the circle. The Voidstalker's writhing form, Eleanor and Garrett's joined hands, even the air itself seemed to crystallize into perfect stillness. In that suspended moment, Irving began to glow with an internal light. First silver like moonlight, then blue like Eleanor's protection magic, then finally gold, the color of life itself. The light poured from him in waves, flowing toward the pendant, enveloping the Voidstalker in a cocoon of radiance. "Irving!" Eleanor cried, trying to reach for him, but finding herself unable to move, still bound to the ritual. The old wolf turned to her, his face serene despite the obvious pain the process was causing him. "This is as it should be," he said, his voice somehow reaching her despite the roaring energies around them. "I have lived long enough to see the circle complete, to witness your return to the pack, to know that what was broken will be mended through you." The light emanating from Irving intensified, becoming almost too bright to look at directly. The Voidstalker shrieked in fury and fear, its form compressing, drawn inexorably toward the pendant, despite its desperate resistance. "Remember who you are," Irving said, his form beginning to blur at the edges, becoming translucent as the light poured out of him. "Remember all of us who came before, and teach those who will follow." With those words, Irving's physical form dissolved completely into pure light, a blinding flash that filled the entire clearing. When Eleanor could see again, blinking spots from her vision, the old wolf was gone. In his place, a sphere of golden light hovered above the altar, stones slowly descending to envelop the silver pendant. The Voidstalker gave one final unearthly cry as it was pulled completely into the pendant. The blue protection dome collapsed, the golden light faded, and sudden silence fell over the stone circle. Eleanor stumbled forward, catching herself against the altar stone. The pendant lay there, unchanged in appearance, except for the sapphire eyes, which now contained swirling depths that had not been there before. "Irving," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Irving." Garrett stepped to her side, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. He said nothing, merely placing his hand on her shoulder in silent support. After a moment of shared grief, Garrett carefully lifted the pendant, using a pair of silver tongs Irving had prepared, placing it in the protective box. The moment the lid closed, sealed with wax, inscribed with symbols of containment, Eleanor felt a weight lift from the air. The oppressive presence of the Voidstalker was gone, completely and irrevocably bound. But so was Irving, his life force sacrificed to ensure the binding's permanence. The knowledge sat like a stone in Eleanor's heart as they made their way back to the pack house, warriors forming a protective circle around them, the box containing the pendant carried with reverent care. The days that followed passed in a haze of grief and adjustment. A formal ceremony was held to honor Irving's sacrifice, attended by representatives from neighboring packs who had known and respected the ancient wolf. Stories were shared of his wisdom, his courage, his occasional mischievous humor that few had witnessed, but all appreciated. Eleanor found solace in caring for the children, especially Emma, whose sensitivity had been heightened by the events. The little girl often spoke of seeing Irving in her dreams, describing him as made of stars now, in a way that brought both pain and comfort to those who heard her. And As for Eleanor herself, the binding ritual had exacted its price. Her connection to her wolf heritage remained, but diminished, a banked ember rather than a roaring flame. Yet other abilities had strengthened her. Healing magic in particular had grown more potent, as if infused with some portion of Irving's ancient knowledge. 3 months after the binding, the council formally acknowledged Eleanor's position within the pack. Not as a traditional Luna. Her relationship with Garrett was built on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than romantic love, but as something new, healer, elder, guardian of boundaries. On the evening of her investiture, Eleanor stood on the porch of the pack house, watching as autumn painted the forest in hues of gold and crimson. So much had changed since that night when she had awakened to sense danger stalking through the darkness. "Deep thoughts?" Garrett asked, joining her at the railing. Remembering, Eleanor replied, smiling slightly. "It seems impossible that so much could change in such a short time." Garrett's hand covered hers on the railing, warm and solid. "Do you regret it? Coming here, discovering your heritage, facing the Void Stalker, what was lost?" Eleanor considered this, looking out over the territory that had become home in a way her solitary cabin never truly had. "I lost much," she acknowledged. "The pendant, a deeper connection to my wolf blood Irving." Her voice caught on the name. "But I gained so much more." She turned to face Garrett fully. "Family, purpose, a place where my knowledge and experience are valued." In the yard below, the triplets played with the other pack children, their laughter carrying up to the porch. Emma looked up, sensing their attention, and waved enthusiastically before returning to her game. "She's thriving under your guidance," Garrett observed. "They all are." "They're remarkable children," Eleanor said. "Emma especially. Her gift grows stronger each day, but she's learning to control it rather than being controlled by it." "Thanks to you," Garrett said. "Irving knew what he was doing, bringing you to us. He saw further than any of us." The mention of Irving brought a pang of grief, but also a warm certainty. "He did, and I intend to honor his faith in me." She touched the crystal pendant she now wore alongside the silver chain Irving had given her connection to both sides of her heritage. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Sarah appeared at the door to announce that representatives from the neighboring Stone Creek pack had arrived for the alliance ceremony. "I'll be right there," Garrett assured her. When they were alone again, he turned back to Eleanor. Ready to make history, the first boundary keeper to serve as formal advisor to 4 allied packs. Eleanor smiled, straightening her shoulders. At 65, she had believed her most significant contributions were behind her. How wonderfully wrong she had been. "Ready," she affirmed. As they walked back inside together, Eleanor felt something stir within her, the ember of her heritage glowing slightly brighter. Perhaps with time and care, it might rekindle more fully. But even if it remained as it was, a distant echo of what might have been, she was content with what she had found instead. The moon would rise full again tonight, its silver light bathing the forest that was now her home. And beneath that light, surrounded by the family she had discovered in the unlikeliest of circumstances, Eleanor Grace, boundary keeper and healer, would continue the legacy Irving had entrusted to her, connecting past to present, heritage to future. Just as her grandmother had promised all those years ago, "Remember who you are, even when others forget." Eleanor remembered, and in remembering had found her true self at last.